Welcome back everyone. Today's video, I'm carrying on with my Wheel of Time reviews. We're now on book 6, The Lord of Chaos. This is probably the book that I've been looking forward to most to talking about with this series, because I think of all of the books, maybe outside of like the last book, it's one of the more divisive ones. Some seem to love it, others seem to think it's the beginning of the slog, and if you watched my vlog last week, you'll already know on which side of that camp I fall on, but if you didn't watch that vlog, let's just get into it. Part 1, Summary. With many of the seals on his prison broken, the Dark One has grown in power. His powers affect the weather, causing global warming. He revives 2 of the dead Forsaken, and creates Shaida Haran, a Midrol who begins to sow tension between the Forsaken, who continue to compete to become Nablus, the Dark One's right hand. Meanwhile, Rand finds himself caught between the politicking nobles in Caemlyn, and he must deal with both the rebel Aes Sedai and the White Tower, all without Moraine's guidance. He must also deal with the ramifications of his decision to pardon all male channelers, who are now united as the Black Tower, which Rand leaves in the care of the false dragon Mazrim Taim. Rand is eventually reunited with Perrin and Min, and Min warns Rand that if he and Perrin do not stay close, that some terrible thing will happen to him. Amongst the rebel Aes Sedai, Lane and Nynaeve continue to make discoveries with the power, partially under the reluctant guidance of the enslaved Forsaken Moghedien. In spite of their discoveries, they struggle to gain acceptance and respect among the rebel Aes Sedai. Egwene slowly recovers from her wounds from the battle in the Fires of Heaven. Though she has been told to stay out of Teleran Riod by the Wise Ones, she continues to visit it in secret. She finds herself trapped in Gawain's dreams of her. This leads to a romance between the two. Soon after, Egwene is summoned by the rebel Aes Sedai to Salidar, where, to her surprise, she is made into the Amyrlin seat. Part 1. And so the slog begins. So from what I can gather, some people seem to think that this is the cream of the crop as far as the Wheel of Time is concerned, and others seem to not like this book very much, not necessarily saying it's the worst one, but at least it's the start of where the slog begins. Now, in my view, I think it is a solid book in the series, I think it's really good, but it is definitely the beginning of that slog. Now, there are a few reasons why I think this, and it will be a recurring theme in the later sections of this video, but in this section I want to focus on one of the big reasons why I think it's the case. So looking at the series overall, I think there is a big distinction between books 1 and 5, and then books 6 to 10. And this distinction is in terms of the way these books are structured. If you look at the first 5 books, they oftentimes follow fewer characters than the books that follow, and they also have a very clear through line. Usually you'll have a core of characters, whether that's just Rand like in the first book or a few others in the later ones, and they have a main psychological obstacle that they need to overcome, and they have usually a main villain or antagonist in that book, who usually gets defeated at the end. Now, this plotline, although it did become a bit repetitive because of the way it was done in previous books, does give the story a structure, a skeleton, and that structure makes the story somewhat easier to follow, it makes it flow, and it makes the books easier to follow because you have a very clear progression from start to finish, and that's more satisfying as a reader. But as we get to book 6, and then especially with the later books in the slog, we see that structure starting to dissipate. Instead of focusing on primary characters and their main psychological obstacles, and even sometimes the main antagonists as well, we get a much broader focus on side characters and world building. In this book in particular, we have, for example, the chapters with Morgase, as she has fled Caemlyn and she's now with the White Cloaks. We also have way more chapters now from Aes Sedai characters. I think Verin gets a chapter or 2 in this book. We also have Alana, we have Galina, I think we have, what's-her-face, the Elida as well. So you've got lots of side characters coming into the story, and while that makes for a much more complex and, lots of things going on kind of book, it does mean that the pacing gets hampered a lot because you're constantly being pushed to focus on these side characters who don't really progress very much. And so you don't get as much time to develop the major story forward. And it is this stopping the story from going forward that is the key problem with the slog. Now, I don't think it's particularly bad in this book, especially not in comparison to, later ones, but it's definitely starting here. We can see Jordan slowly progressing to books where he wants to focus on his side characters and his world and building that, and not really progressing the story very much. So that's why I say that it's this book where the slog begins, and as a reader you certainly start to feel that, or at least I did. And so that did keep the book back a little bit for me. Luckily for us though, The Lord of Chaos does have lots of things that keep it from being a true slog book. And that leads me nicely into Part 2, Pivotal Moments. So if I was to give an overarching theme to this book, which I think is a bit harder than it is to do in the previous books, but I think you can still do it. The theme that I would give for this book would be, or the thing that I would say this book does, would be that the main characters, and I'm especially thinking here of Nynaeve, Egwene and Rand, this is the book where they really come into their full powers. Now I don't mean that they reach their fullest potential here, I just mean that this is the book where they start to be taken seriously as players in the game, and less so as pieces on a board to be moved. Now because of this theme that I've noticed, you can see this reflected in what's happening to the characters in this book. They have huge character moments. So first of all we have Nynaeve, who for most of the book is struggling to assert her authority among the Aes Sedai. We have her curing some of the, some things that Aes Sedai thought were incurable, like stilling, and ultimately becoming an Aes Sedai at the end of the book. We have Egwene, of course, becoming the Armorland seat, and while there's definitely still going to be tensions with people trying to play her, it's her still taking this big mantle. And of course we have Rand, who at the end of the book has some of the Aes Sedai submit to him, and again this is just a big moment of another character saying, you will respect me, you will follow me, I am not going to be treated like a child anymore. And I think that's the key thing that's going on in this book. So as I said, I don't think that this is the book where all of these problems go away. Rand, Egwene, Nynaeve, Elaine, all of the characters still face conflict amongst not just themselves, but the other characters, whether it's the Aes Sedai, the White Cloaks, lords and ladies in the various cities. They still face these problems, but I do feel like this is the book where people start to take them seriously as players in the game. Like, we still might want to defeat Rand, or, take control over one of the cities that he has, but we see Rand now as a noble, as a force to be reckoned with, rather than as a farm boy or someone who's under the, control of Aes Sedai. And I think that's what's really happening in this book, and it's where this book really shines. It's in those key moments with Egwene, Rand, and Nynaeve especially, having these big character moments where they're just coming into their power and blossoming. And I do think this is why the book does come up high on a lot of people's lists. It's not necessarily because it's the best structured book, it's just that it's the book that has so many key moments in the series, so many memorable moments. People always go on about the Battle of Dumai's Wells at the end of the book, for instance, and Nynaeve's curing Stilling. These are just huge moments in the series, and so it does usually rank as a high book for that. Nevertheless, I do think that some of those pacing problems, it is I think it might be the longest, or one of the longest books in the series. And so these things do keep the book back a little bit, even if it does have some great moments. Part 3, Love and Relationships. So one thing that I did want to talk about in this review is the relationships, which isn't something I've touched on that much in previous reviews, I don't think. But it's something that I noticed a lot in this book, are the romantic relationships that we get. And some of these are, good relationships, others are relationships that people complain about a lot, so I wanted to talk about them. So first of all, I wanted to talk about Perrin and Faile, because their relationship, I think, does some very interesting things in this book. So when Perrin finally returns to the story about 3/4 of the way through, which is a little gripe of mine with the book, when he finally returns, he returns with Faile to Rand, and Faile's parents are there, and he has to meet them for the first time and tell them that he's married their daughter. Now this leads to a confrontation with Perrin and Faile's father, and Faile has a confrontation with her mother that's mostly off screen. So they have these two confrontations. And I like this scene because it's a scene in which we learn a little bit about the Saldean, which is Faile's cultural heritage, her race, I guess. We learn a lot about their culture and how men and women engage with each other in that culture, and how it differs from how Perrin thinks you should treat women, and likewise women should treat men. So Faile's parents have this very fiery, aggressive, and even seemingly violent relationship with each other. And this kind of shocks Perrin to see that is how they do things. And I really like the whole scene there where he's talking to Faile's dad and he's learning how they do things. And you just have this kind of cultural clash moment as they're getting to know each other. And I just think it's really well done. And it just captures how, if you are with someone who is from a culture that's very different from yours, how awkward and bizarre meeting the parents can be, especially when the parents are both of the same culture that your partner's from. So I thought that was a really interesting scene, and just added a bit of depth to that marriage and that relationship, and shows a little bit of why Faile is the way that she is, because she's quite an aggressive, fiery character, and it kind of makes sense when you meet her parents why she's like that. Unfortunately, one thing that I would say about Perrin and Fael is that basically from this point on in the series, really, they just become this amorphous blob relationship where they don't really have character development outside of each other, and I do think that is a real shame. I think it's good in a sense because I think their relationship is one of the more interesting ones, even if it has problems in it, and I think it's interesting. But because they become so ingrained in each other and so tied with each other's plot, most of their story is just relationship drama, and it gets a bit boring, especially the stuff with Berylane, which I don't really see the point of the Berylane-Fael love triangle. It just seems to be there because it's there. So yeah, I think I like their relationship, but it irritates me that from this point on, Perrin especially, because he's a main character, he just kind of gets subsumed into the relationship that he's in and there's nothing more to him. Whereas if you look at other characters' relationships, like Egwene's with Gawain and Rand's with Min, Aviendha and Elaine, that doesn't happen as much as it does with, unfortunately, Perrin and Fael. Speaking of Egwene and Gawain, let's get on to that because that is one of the most controversial relationships in the series. But I am going to try and defend it a little bit here. So as I said in the summary, Egwene goes into the dream world and she gets sucked into one of Gawain's fantasies, and after this moment she seems to basically fall in love with him, just snap. And a lot of people complain about this because she's never showed any interest before. She always showed interest in Galad, Gawain's brother, and suddenly she's like, oh, Gawain, I love you, and it's just a bit much. Now, their relationship is annoying and does lead to some things later on in the series that I won't talk about, but I think I have a little pet theory about why this happens and why it's so instant. My little theory is that when Egwene gets sucked into Gawain's dream, his love dream, I think that actually does something to her mind, and that's why she ends up falling in love with him. Now, there's no clear evidence in the text that I can really think of to support this, but it makes sense then. It just makes sense as to why she suddenly has this change. And also, one thing I guess in the text that makes me think this is that Egwene is always warned by the Wise Ones, don't go into Tel'aran'rhiod. Stop going there when without us, because we know it and you don't, and you are not ready, you're not prepared. And Egwene, she never listens to anyone, really. She is a vivacious character, she does what she wants, and that's great. But it does sometimes lead to problems, and I wonder if one of the problems is that she goes there into this dream, she gets sucked in, and it actually has an effect on her. It has an effect on her mind. So I do wonder if Egwene's being sucked into Tel'aran'rhiod and falling for Gawain is a consequence of her not listening to the Wise Ones and their warnings of how dangerous this place is. As I said, there's nothing in the text explicit that ever tells us this, but I just think she's warned about this so much, and nothing bad really tends to happen to her in it, except maybe this. And given what happens as a consequence of this relationship, it would be satisfying. It would make an annoying relationship satisfying if there was a reason for it. So maybe I'm looking into things a little bit here. Do let me know in the comments, what do you think of that? Do you think that her being sucked into his dream did actually have some magical effect on her mind and her feelings for him? And that explains why it just comes out of nowhere. Now, for the last relationship I want to talk about in this book, and that is the relationship that we get between Rand and Min as they finally reunite with one another. Now, Rand and Min, that's probably one of my favourite relationships in the book, and it's certainly of Rand's 3 relationships, it's my favourite one. I think mostly because they get to spend the most time together, so it develops more than the other 2 do. I also think it's a relationship that Jordan does pretty well, even though relationships are not necessarily his best or strong suit. That being said, just like Perrin, once he gets with Fael, seems to just become a amorphous blob thing, I do think this happens a little bit with Min. Rand manages to maintain his own character because he has a lot going on, but I do feel like from this point on, Min does sort of just become the Cassandra character, if you like. You know the story from Greek mythology. Cassandra, prophet, warns the king. That's basically what she becomes from this point. She's like the woman that sits at Rand's side and tells him visions, and he either listens to her or doesn't, and then things happen. And it's a bit of a shame because I do like Min. I think she's a great character. But she's a side character, so she doesn't need to be as well fleshed out, so it doesn't bother me as much as it does when Perrin's character gets subsumed into Fael. But yeah, it would be nice if she had a bit more independence too. But we have what we have, and overall I do think that their relationship is a good relationship. So it's not that bad. Part 5. Finding Order in the Chaos. So funnily enough, true to its name, The Lord of the Chaos is a bit of a chaotic novel. we have, at this point now, we have so many different characters and factions coming together and clashing with each other. You've got the Rebel Aes Sedai and the White Tower and the Black Tower. You've got the Aiel and the Shido Aiel as well. But the main Aiel, Rand's Aiel, integrating with cities, cultures, and you have different cities and lords and ladies from different places all having to get along with each other while Rand's trying to unite them. And of course, then you have, on top of that, the Forsaken, who are not only now plotting against Rand, but plotting against each other. So you have this huge, intricate web, and it makes for a very interesting world and a very nuanced world as well. Now, on this theme, I think that in this book especially, Jordan does some of his best cultural work. But not so much creating cultures, he's already kind of done that. It's now about how cultures come together and integrate with each other. The big thing that really struck me in this book is when you have the Aiel in one of the cities, I can't remember which one at this point, but they're in this city, I think, let's say it's Tyr, I don't think it is, but let's say it is, and the people in that city are starting to take on Aiel customs. And in one sense, this is kind of cool, right? You've got this multicultural integration thing, but there are some Aiel that are really offended by this, because they're like, people usually misinterpreting the culture and not doing things right, so you have this kind of wanting to do it but not doing it right, and that obviously riles the Aiel up. So you have this really cool cultural tension between these different people, and I think it's just done and pulled off so well. In fact, a lot of the races in the Wheel of Time, they do seem very much tied to their cultural identities, and they don't really like integrating. But throughout the series, we do see that slow integration happening, as these cultures have to interact with each other and work together. And we do see slowly, little by little, people becoming more accepting, more multicultural, and there is just something really beautiful about the way that Jordan does this. I like that he takes his time with it, I like that he captures the difficulties and the struggles and the confusions when you're meeting people for the first time who just have a completely different worldview from yourself. And yeah, it's one of the best bits of this book, and also just of the series in general. The way he creates cultures is one thing, but the way then he follows that through with how do cultures interact with each other? How can these people actually get to a point where they can understand each other so that they can then go on and defeat the Dark One? I think it's just a really good theme in the book, and it's got some really good bits in here. I also find it impressive with this book in particular. It really overwhelmed me at this point rereading it, because when you first read The Wheel of Time, there's so much going on. There are so many people, so many characters, so many races, that it's really hard to focus on any of them in particular. But now going through a second read, and I'm just seeing at this point in the book how much crap Rand has to deal with, or people Rand has to deal with. And it's not like Rand's just dealing with a load of baddies, right? And all these baddies are on one side. He's got people who are, pure evils, the Forsaken and the Dark One and Dark Friends. But then he's got the White Tower, the Rebel Aes Sedai, and the Black Tower, all kind of against each other and somewhat against him. Or he doesn't know with the Black Tower at this point. There's ambiguity there, right? He's got his relationships with the nobles in the cities all politicking behind his back. He's even got suspicions about his friends at this point. And so you've just got all these competing forces and all these people and kinds of conflicts. And it's just overwhelming. And I think it's this book where you really see how chaotic all of that is. And now all of this brings me to my final point. Part 5, conclusion. Personally, I do think that Lord of Chaos is a bit of a mess. I think it's got some really good high watershed moments, but structurally it is all over the place with all of these characters and all of these conflicts. But I do think there may be a reason for this sudden kind of catastrophe, if you like, in terms of just focusing on the wider world even more than we have been in previous books. So in the first 5 books we have Moiraine, and she is a guiding figure in the books. She guides Rand whether he wants it or not for the most part. And especially in the early books, it's often her that drives the plot and brings Rand to his key moments at the end. Now after book 5, Moiraine is gone, and Rand and all of the characters are just left to deal with everything on their own. So Rand has lost his guiding figure, his authority figure if you like. And with that, at the same time seems to go the more clear structure of the books that we have in the first 5 books. And suddenly we get, from books now till maybe even the end really, we have books that don't have a clear plot, a clear structure. And it kind of symbolizes that kind of, when you become an adult and you realize how much stuff you have to deal with in life. And slowly, from this point on, these characters have to try and come together to make everything work again so that they can do the big climactic thing and kill the Dark One. And so I wonder, and I don't know for sure or whatever if this was intentional, but I do wonder if there's a way of seeing the slog, and the reason why the slog is a bit of a mess with just lots of things going on. Kind of seeing it in a symbolic way like that. So, you know, it's our main characters losing their guiding figure and then having to wade through the mess of the world and bring it all together again at the end so that they can defeat the Dark One. Now, whether or not you buy into that, again, it might be a bit of a kooky thing, it might just be me, but it does help me appreciate the slog a little bit more, because I'm seeing it more as a symbolic way of our characters just seeing how complex and messy the world is, and like the world being complex and messy, so are these slog books. Again, let me know what you think about that in the comments, because I think it's an interesting point of discussion, and it might be something that when I've read the series again as a whole, I might do something on the different stages of the series, because I do think there are these distinct structural differences between the first 5 books, the next set of books, and then the final 4 books. So I think it would be interesting to dig it deeper into that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, do let me know it in the comments. But my overall thoughts with Lord of Chaos, it is a really good book in the series. I do think it is the beginning of the slog, but of the books in the slog, it is definitely the best, and it has some of the best key moments of the series. You know, you can't beat the climax in this one. I mean, you can, it's the climax in the final book, but it is one of the best climactic moments in the book, the end of this one. So overall, I enjoyed it. I think the series is great, and I'm looking forward to continuing, because on my first read through, I didn't like The Crown of Swords at all, and I actually thought, well, on my first reread, that it might actually be my worst book. So I'm looking forward to rereading that and seeing if my view, or negative view, of that changes. But that's all for another video. Okay, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and please subscribe to my channel. Let me know what you think about my Gawain and Elaine theory, and also about my chaotic structure theory, which I think was also chaotic in the way that I described it, so you know, fun. I really like to talk with you guys about those things in the comments, and also about anything else you think with this book, because I do think it is one of the more divisive ones. But that is it for this video, so take care everyone, and I'll see you all next time.